Video is going, and now audio is going too.
It is.
Welcome back to Shun for Good Reason. I'm Anna.
I'm Tess.
And today, we are continuing our Where Are We Now and How Did We Get To series with a How Did We Get Here? And we will specifically be talking about your turn.
You still say it.
I don't want to say it. You can't blame me for not wanting to say it.
Oh, whose idea was this?
Well, technically it was both of our idea. I'm just going to straighten out this video camera. But
Both
part
our
of
faults.
it is both of our faults.
Nope.
That's our tagline, right? Is whose fault did you think it was? It was ours. It is an indisputable part of how we got to where we are now, both as a society, as a fundamentalist religion, and as ourselves. We're going to be talking about the KKK.
I thought I was gonna say it.
You didn't want to say it. I was trying to be helpful. You say it now.
The Ku Klux Klan.
Ku Klux Klan.
That's what I said.
Oh, I thought you said Clue. That's a different game. We're going to switch things up a little bit. Tess is going to be presenting. I'm going to be reacting.
Sure.
Oh no.
Well, I mean, like, the truth is, like, my lived experience of it is very little. Like, I know all what I've known about. I'll start with you. What have you known about the Ku Klux Klan? Just broadly in your life.
Okay, so first off, they, in popular culture, wear white robes and white pointy fabric hats.
Yep. Got a picture in my head.
You gotta have the picture in your head. In popular culture, they are responsible for racial violence and lynchings. And in less than popular culture, so more individualized experience growing up in Southern Baptistry, essentially, the Ku Klux Klan were viewed as a group of people that had been villainized, who wore masks to protect their identity. The general understanding in that specific space was that the Ku Klux Klan were not an organized group of people, but were vigilantes who had to hide their faces for the good of the community while enacting justice that the government was not willing to enact. So, essentially, Southern Baptist Batman.
Southern Baptist Batman.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So the popular culture likes to view them as like isolated individuals that found belonging in a group of people, but what you're not really taking into account there is that the hoods have to be starched. This is not a solitary thing. These men didn't even know how to turn on an iron, let alone use one or use starch. This was a collective effort that went into even making the costume, let alone organizing the thing in the first place. You think white men were able to organize something and figure out a costume and bleach it and starch it? No. This is not something that could happen with the white men that I am familiar with.
I'm sure there's a couple.
I'm sure there's... well, they were probably closeted.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and most of my, you were probably a little, you have a little bit different experience with the Southern Baptists than I did, because like for me it was just like those people lived in a different time in a different place, and they probably shouldn't have done what they did. And that was kind of because I grew up in Colorado, and it's like that. Out west, we're far away from everything that happened over there in the east side of America and south side of America, right? So it's just kind of don't think about it, don't talk about it too much. That was kind of how I grew up with it, but I have recently learned a little bit more about it, and apparently there have been three primary, I don't know, insurgencies or three primary times when the KKK really grew in popularity, and it was always in response to something, right? There was always some increased, either increased freedom for black people, or increased immigration, or yeah, usually either of those things. So it was always a very uh, it was always very easy to tie these uh, increases in popularity to some claim of fear that Americans had, that America was becoming less American in their eyes, right? And so the first time was right after the Civil War. So 1965, 1966, it's sort of unclear because the KKK has never been organized enough to have like clear records. But especially right after the Civil War, it was just like it wasn't what you described with the robes and the imagery and everything. It was much more tied to, like, at the time, the secret fraternities were becoming really popular in the United States.
Like the skull and crossbones and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I have never heard of skull and crossbones, but
we'll get into
I'm sure that's one
Don't
of them.
worry.
But that kind of, the guys go and meet at the lodge on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they're tied to these secret fraternal order things where you do weird initiation rites and come up with names for leaders in the hierarchy and stuff like that. And so I don't think I'll go into too much detail about it, but the Ku Klux Klan kind of came out of one of those, essentially. And just to paint it in broad strokes, it was just this time where the Civil War had just ended, and slavery had been technically outlawed in the United States, and so there was this kind of, so it's just kind of like people coming together to, I get it, and the people who started the Ku Klux Klan were all coming out of the Confederate Army, pretty much, or generals in the Confederate Army, and and it was all kind of tame until
which the Confederate Army is notoriously known for being tame and just fraternal and non-racist and just like a nice gang of boys. They're just so sweet. I'm just so glad that they had some great post-war fraternity efforts that they could get together with and bowl and lynch people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tame. So I'm not salty. It's fine.
Well, well, what I meant by tame is like they didn't really like the violent stuff didn't really start being a thing
until they got tired of not being at war.
well, right. Well, that and when the North started to tell the South that they actually had to start enacting these reforms. Um, the name of it is totally escaping me.
Which, the Emancipation Proclamation, or
No.
what reforms are we talking about here?
Well, it was based on the Emancipation Proclamation, but Reconstruction. When the North started enacting the Reconstruction laws, and that's when the South really and the people in the Ku Klux Klan really started to, I think, realize that the end of the Civil War meant things were going to change, and started to, and specifically the Ku Klux Klan started burning people's houses down and lynching people, and
Tame.
That isn't the tame part.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And again, like it wasn't at this point the white hoods and stuff. They did wear hoods, right? But it was more like it just seemed like it was just this violent reaction of this group of people getting together and trying to keep black people from voting and from so when voting times would come up, there would just be hundreds and hundreds of murders that happened because that way those people wouldn't be able to vote, right?
Well, and the absence of hoods, I am going to refer back to these men did not know how to bleach and starch.
Well, yeah, and I would just say it just hadn't developed to a point where they'd taken on quite so much imagery and stuff, that we think of it now. It was just still this very nascent reaction to what was happening, Civil War, post-Civil War time, and in the Reconstruction era specifically. And so, again, I'm trying to zip through this first one a little bit so we can get to kind of the second wave. But the first one, off like just this horrible uprising of Southern white men who just couldn't deal with black people having rights, essentially, and trying to fight for the America they knew and wanted, and essentially just white supremacy, right? That white people were better than black people, and that black people didn't deserve to vote and to have rights, and there was this, and it was always this like it's interesting, like some people talk about it as if, well, if they were killing people and burning down their houses, those people must have done something to them, right? As if the black people had done something to cause this, which just wasn't the case, right? Like the propaganda that the Ku Klux Klan was putting out at the time was very, these people are going to want revenge for having been in slavery for so long, so we have to stop it before it starts, right? And which was just not the case, right? There's no instances of African Americans wanting to have revenge from slavery post Civil War, right? They were just, they were very happy to try and live lives as humans, not enslaved, but and there's just these white people who decided that they hated that and that was not right, and that they were going to try and do whatever they could to make it right, right? So you can see there's this like the feeding of the fear, right? That these people are going to harm us, that they're going to do more harm because of the way things are now, and we're going to put a stop to it. is kind of essentially seemed to be what the propaganda was.
Mhm.
And um, um, fortunately, um, kind of what ultimately uh, caused that first wave to die down was essentially the involvement of uh, the U.S. government. Ulysses S. Grant was president, and um, he, him and his attorney general, um, really kind of strong armed the South into getting rid of the Ku Klux Klan. Like they declared martial law in some cities in order to hold elections so that the Ku Klux Klan couldn't stop black people from voting, and um, uh, and were just and had they did everything they could essentially to oppose the Ku Klux Klan, and that really just caused it to die down for a while. It had a huge effect on kind of dismantling the Klan for several decades. I think that was the early 70s, 1870s, if I remember right, when they really. So it was kind of short lived, that first wave of the Ku Klux Klan, just kind of this short, very violent period that, interestingly enough, the federal government had to step in and to stop essentially and say you can't do this anymore, which is kind of sad actually, but that's the way that had to go. But because they had enough firepower, and they were just sneaky enough about it and had just enough anonymity that the federal government had to step in. So but it kind of it died down for a while. Not to say and like it's an did racism disappear? No. Right? These guys, there's still racism. There's still kind of this underlying fear of change, and I think just kind of waiting to be reborn, and and so the second wave is really interesting. I thought it was really interesting. Was started by was really the resurgence was started with a movie. Did you know about this?
It depends. Which movie are you talking
The
about?
Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
Yeah. Which was a silent movie.
Yeah.
So it was 1915 when it came out.
Well, and it was a propaganda movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and it really this was when this was really the first time you get to the hoods and the robes and
yeah. Well, because a lot of them had to come from Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, and that's what was in the movie. That's what was portrayed in the movie. Because what the movie was doing was taking what that first wave of the Ku Klux Klan had done and was really glamorizing it. Yeah. Right? Like the movie really portrayed slaves as like vicious animals and the Ku Klux Klan as this savior type group of people, right, who were saving the country, right? Yeah. And not only that, but like they used religious symbols and really tied it to this to Protestantism that way, and which is easy to do with America because so much of what America has become, especially had become by 1915, was tied up in Protestant ideals and
in iconography as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it was and all of this was in response to just this huge wave of immigration that had been happening since the late 19th century, right? All the just huge waves of people coming through Ellis Island and not just African Americans, but people from Japan and people from Mexico
Well, but also people from Russia, the Ukraine,
Yeah.
Poland,
Yeah.
all of this.
Italy, Ireland.
Yes. They were coming in from a variety of places,
Yeah.
which is where most of my ancestors ended up coming into the United States.
Right. And so there's again this burgeoning of fear of change. And I'm curious, you know, what your thoughts are on why is it that the like new people coming in is so scary to people, or maybe specifically to Americans, or why is that?
Why do you think people are scared of change?
Right, or different people who are different coming in, right? Just this, because the first time, you know, it was the freeing of the slaves, and then the second time it's this influx of immigrants, and it's fear of change, fear of people who are different, fear of different ideologies. There's a lot of aspects.
So you're asking essentially why xenophobia is a thing.
Sure. Why can't we just all get along?
We can't all get along.
Why not?
Oh gosh. So I say xenophobia because xenophobia is the fear of the other, and it doesn't necessarily, essentially, yeah. It doesn't necessarily give off what it actually is. Because yes, you think fear of the alien, because xeno actually does mean alien or outside, or what we think of in modern history from apparently the 70s to now, when we're not thinking of immigration being the problem. We've been bombarded with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and the subsequent terror and xenophobia of alien species coming to our planet. But it's tapping into the same fear that you're having in these times that you're talking about, which is still xenophobia, even if it's not an extraterrestrial alien. And it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you have the very basics, you don't have to worry about the very basics. You go farther and farther up on this hierarchy. So the first thing is like you need food, you need to sleep, you need water, you need to not be dying from a disease. And that's one of the first things you have to think about. When you go up farther, you actually need shelter. When you go up farther, you need community. When you go up farther, you need more self-actualizing sort of things. So we don't even have... Xenophobia can exist in all of those, but you find it expressed in culture more often when we're worrying about the self-actualization process. So when you're worried about whether or not you have food, water, and safety and are not dying from a disease, you're worried about the others taking those things from you. When you move up farther and you're worried about community, you're worried about the outsiders taking that community away from you. And when you go up to the self-actualizing, you're afraid that somebody else is going to take that away from you. But either way, that pyramid just stacks farther and farther out. And you become afraid of different things at each stage of that, but all of them are still xenophobia, right? They're fear of the unknown. So when you feel like you have finally reached the part where you don't have to worry about dying right now, you are concerned that the community that you are trying to make is going to be threatened by those things outside. And since we have to deal with tribalism, you start seeing this in children when they're 4 or 5, and then you see it like really hard in middle schoolers. You have this tribalism mindset where we are the in-group, they are the out-group. We know these things, they don't know these things. We are the ones where we find community and belonging and our means to an end, and anything that comes and disrupts that is entirely chaotic and we need to be afraid of it. And I say middle schoolers because we have middle schoolers. We have 3 middle schoolers right now. So when they come back from school and they're like, oh, I can't believe this person did that. Usually what that is this person part of my middle school tribe? What have they done that has upset other members of the tribe? Do I align myself with the larger tribe? Do I align myself with this person? It's less about who's right and who's wrong, and more about what does my evolutionary brain understand is going to be most beneficial to my survival. And that's where xenophobia comes. If you have to think about things that are outside of what you've known, or about people who are outside of what you've known, it can damage your alliance to the tribe that you've started to form.
Right. And I know, like, that I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And looking at the KKK and thinking about American history and like the Second Great Awakening that happened between the Civil War in 1915, where really Protestantism in America, and specifically in the more Pentecostal version of it, kind of burgeoned throughout the country. And there's just this kind of, and the most, you're reading. I remember it being taught in Bible school as kind of a time of revival, right? Where the church is growing and people are becoming Christians, and even though it was kind of a wild time for the church, where lots of different churches were popping up.
Well, but it had to be a wild time for the church. Yeah. Because everybody was a Xeno.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because you are coming from this Reconstruction movement after the Civil War. Yeah. And during the Civil War, you had your tribe. You were North or you were South.
Right.
And then you had your family tribes within that. But once you were required by law to break that down, you had to find meaning somewhere else. So once you couldn't be part of the Confederate Army anymore, you had to fall back on what you had before. That's why we see a resurgence of religion. People are trying to find their tribe.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's one of the things that helps them find their tribe.
Yeah.
And when you get into that Reconstruction mindset, as we've seen, leaving the Protestant church, when you get into those very small groups of people who are all attempting to leave the same thing, that tribalism can be even stronger, because you're looking for something to replace a lifetime of belonging. Right. And the weirder the better, because if you and your friends are all into the same weird shit, then that's going to strengthen those tribal bindings a lot more quickly than it would otherwise, and you get that sense of belonging that you would have had in the Army or in the South.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. So you have this kind of growth of people trying to find these new belongings and find their identity and these different Protestant Christian sects, and then you have this influx of immigration. And it's interesting because the second wave of the Klan much more explicitly framed itself as protecting Protestant Christian values. Specifically, they embraced prohibition and opposed unions and immigration, which those were kind of, I suppose, the hot button topics at the time.
Right.
Right. Like, because again at the time, to add unions to immigration, right? There was it was a huge war between those who owned the production facilities and those who were working in them, right? And it was this big power struggle that I feel like we're still fighting somehow.
No, we are.
Like, the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, I don't feel like this ever ended.
Well, and it hasn't. But also, the Prohibition movement was very drastically tied to immigration at this time, because the world is built on alcohol. And you can decry that all you want. But in Egypt, beer was essentially your rations. In Italy, wine is not only a cultural touchstone, but also one of the primary ways of finding community. And then you have your hops beers like farther into Scandinavia. You've got your vodkas that you have over in Russia / Poland, and when those immigrants came, they brought those cultures with them. But the production had not been actually set up for those to be a thing. So you didn't have good ways to get wine, good ways to get beer, good ways to get vodka. If you wanted to not only talk to the people who spoke your language, but also have a taste of home, you had to go to a meeting place where other people like that were. So those places were viewed as xeno and a danger to the communities that America had started building.
Right. Well, it's the same with unions, right? Yeah. Like it's people getting together, other people, right? And probably not, straight white men in power, getting getting together to try and get paid better wages, yep. And join. They have to have meetings, and they have to, in order to, make these things happen. They have to communicate and work together, and it's so interesting to me that like it's just so, again, like the xenophobia thing and how it's just so quickly us versus them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but and on top of that, you have the owners of production, so it's plantation owners and the people who were funded by them. With that rapid turnover of worker populations from enslaved persons to well-organized, well-educated people who are willing to unionize. And it's not only a threat to the culture that you're trying to make, but that is already under threat, but it is also a huge threat to capitalism. Because you were the capitalist, and now these people are coming in and trying to overturn that, in your view. They're trying to take some of the welfare that came from that and actually apply it to the workers. And you've never had to pay a worker in your life. So why would you be willing to do that now?
Right. Well, and so that was really scary from that sense, that they're just trying to take away your things, take away your nice things. But then you get into the religious aspect of not being allowed to drink alcohol, right? Like, and that, it's easy for me to see how that one's so strongly tied to Protestant Christianity.
Yeah.
Right? Because then it's not only a capitalist production thing. It's not even just about meetings. Now it's a religious value.
Yeah.
That is specifically being tied to, right? The good Christian people don't drink alcohol. And so, and you saw them try to make that, it's killing me how many parallels I'm seeing to modern day things, but they tried to, make that religious value a law. And they did for a while, impressively. Right? And you get prohibition. And you have this group of white supremacists tying their wagon, essentially, saying to these Christian values and Christian principles, being like, and saying, yeah, we support prohibition, we're against unions. And so they're winning favor that way, while at the same time enacting vigilante justice, essentially. And again, here we're back to lynchings. We're back to these terrible forms of violence against Black and brown people, all under the cover of we're saving Protestant Christianity. And so I feel like we're to cognitive dissonance again, where we have Christian teachings on loving your neighbor as yourself, and love, and being compassionate, and caring and kind and all of these kind of things that we tend to think of as what Jesus taught, in the very, very broad strokes. And coming into direct conflict with the reality of what these people are doing.
But you have to take into account, and I can say this based on my background, you have to take into account the plantation owner perspective in that. And you're going to have to bear with me. You all know that I do not think these things now, but I know the argument. The argument is, I was put in a position of authority by God, and I need to use that authority to the advantage of the most people possible. Therefore, I am not only the owner of these humans, I am also the one in charge of making sure that they are seen as righteous when God comes back for his own. Which means I am going to put into place every policy that I effectively can to make sure that these people are living the most righteous life possible. And that can look a lot of ways, but it's that paternalism that comes from, in a lot of ways, from plantation owners and very well-paid theologians of the time, where loving your neighbor means taking away the means of, I know. Loving your neighbor means that you need to take away the means by which they would be less righteous. So, obviously, God wants us to stand up for ourselves and pull us up by our bootstraps. This is the Protestant work ethic. So, you can't let people unionize because that is not in their best spiritual interest. You need to prohibit alcohol because it is not in the greatest interest of your neighbor for them to get drunk. And there's a demon at the bottom of every bottle, and we've talked about prohibition a little bit on this podcast already, so we don't need to go deeply into that. Also, white men are so much more educated than the mulatto, so we should definitely not educate them because they've already proven that they can't be educated appropriately because they're not educated. But we need to be paternalistic and helpful to them by making sure that the 3/5 compromise is in place so that they can't vote against things which would be in their best interest.
Yeah.
We know more. We are smarter. God put us here for a reason, and because of that, we are in charge of maintaining the righteousness of everyone in our care and making sure that we stay as the ones who are in charge of their care, because otherwise they are going to fall into sin and dismay.
Yeah, well, and that word righteousness, I feel like is a big key. Because there's, I think theology plays such a big part of that way of thinking, right? You have to understand the theology behind it of, starting with everyone's a sinner, right? And I feel like that really helps justify so many things from that perspective.
Yes.
Where, it's a lot easier to call somebody 3/5 of a person when you already believe from the start that they were born evil.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
and then you kind of add the extra layer. We're all born evil, but I found salvation.
Right.
I found this truth that makes everything better.
Well, and it also, I'm going to come back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, because it's been pointed out that a lot of this legislation didn't exist for a long time. And it didn't, because you have to get to the point in legislation where a lot of the primary needs of people are met before they start getting so scared that any legislation that started with America, but specifically when we're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation and the backlash to that.
Oh, yeah.
You have to get to the point as a nation where you can think about those sort of things before people start getting scared that women and black and brown people are going to be educated to the same point as a white man. Like, there's a lot of infrastructure that has to go into this, and it builds and builds and builds more.
Yeah.
And that group of people that you can be angry at can become better and better defined the farther you move up that hierarchy of needs.
So
To where
you are...
at the bottom, we're all just trying to not die of disease and starvation.
Right.
When we get up farther than that, we're all just trying to make sure that we have houses that we can live in. And when we get up farther than that, we can gain the ability, unfortunate as it may be, to look around and say, that person doesn't look like me. That specific person right over there does not look like me. And that scares me, and I don't like that. And I want them specifically to not have the same powers and control that I do.
Right. Well, and then that's just magnified when the group you belong to has created this built-in system of theology that simultaneously justifies hating people.
Yeah.
While creating this feeling of grace and forgiveness, and that you're doing the right thing,
right,
by hating people.
Well, and that's building an entirely different pyramid or triangle from the people over here who are basing it on values of communal reciprocity and equality. So you end up, instead of just having one big pyramid that branches off, you end up building entirely different chains of community. And then by the time you have the ability to look around, those people seem so much more xeno than they were previously.
The people who created the other church?
The people who created the other church or the other pyramid or the other triangle, however you want to think of it.
Yeah.
So you've been so encased, so enclosed, and so self-centered that you have not realized that the people around you are all trying to do exactly the same thing as you. And then by the time you look around and have the ability to look around, which is an artificial environment, obviously, that these white settlers created for themselves. By the time you look around outside of your little white pyramid, you realize that other people have been making pyramids too. And then not only are the people outside of your pyramid evil, but so are the pyramids that they've created. So all of Black and brown culture, or all of Russian culture,
or a union
all
pyramid.
of unions, or all of anything is a threat, because you had such a limited basis upon which to build this tiny little pyramid that you made. All the power and none of the knowledge that you thought you had. It's a problem.
It's more knowledge than at the bottom of the hierarchy, but it's not.
But it's a very limited source for that knowledge.
Because it's not. I feel like when I ask the question, why can't we all just get along? Like the very simple answer to that is, what it would take to do that is actually seeing things from somebody else's point of view and trying to understand these other pyramids and learning about them. Right, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
Getting knowledge about what's happening in somebody else's pyramid, right?
Yeah, but if you've been conditioned and taught to think that your truth is the only truth, your truth is the only truth that matters, your truth is the most righteous truth, and God has only declared your truth to be true.
Right, it's theology again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is where the KKK comes from.
Yeah.
Is theology.
Right, and I feel like that's such a hard thing. Like, I even came out of it, and I still have a hard time remembering sometimes. Like how vastly important that particular aspect of church life was.
Yeah.
Is that being right, and that what we have is pure and holy, and we have to really fight to keep it that way. And we have to, I remember my dad was so obsessed with old books, right?
Yeah.
Because the old books were more right than the new books, which is so backwards from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, he only used one dictionary. What was that dictionary?
Webster's 1812.
Yeah, Webster's 1812. That's the only dictionary that you're allowed to have.
Yeah.
And let's see, what year were we in when he declared that this was the only dictionary that he would allow in his house? Oh yes, 2012.
Yeah. Literally 200 years.
Literally 200 years. But that was the most right dictionary. So if you went back to any definition, it had to be from Webster's.
Oh yeah. Well, and like, oh man, and it's this idea of, you know, like, there was this, we're preserving something, right?
Yes.
That was the emphasis. Like, we're preserving this wholesome, pure thing that.
Because nothing bad ever happened in 1812.
I know. The reality of the situation is so much. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, the understanding of, well, and that's where, you know, like, it's a very closed off understanding of the reality of the situation. Like, my dad thinking that 1812 was this some pinnacle of humanity. It was such a white patriarchal American privilege, right? Because, yeah, 1812, white American men, landowning men, were doing pretty good. Right? Like,
as long as they didn't have too many ties to Europe, yes.
well, yeah. Yeah, it was a select few, but those are the select few that were specifically in my dad's head, right? Yeah. The ruling class in America at the time, right? So my dad was anchoring himself to this very, very specific group of people in this very, very specific group of time, where, you know, he decided that was going to be the foundation of his and safety, right? That was his safety net.
Well, and just to be
for
entirely
not having
clear,
to.
they would have hated him.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. Yeah, but he didn't know that.
No.
But that was his safety net for, you know, being allowed to be really annoyed with how the world is going now, and the you know, to be able to hate, you know, the direction that the country is going, because we're moving away from, you know, probably 1812. I don't know. I feel like I don't know enough about 1812 to blame it all on them, but my dad didn't either. But it's the point being, right? It's so easy. It's surprisingly easy to find whatever you need to justify hating other people. What, again, it can very quickly be seen as cognitive dissonance from the outside, you know, where, didn't Jesus say love your neighbor as yourself? But from the inside, and, you know, to be clear, my dad was, as far as I know, not part of the Ku Klux Klan,
Yeah.
but had this very similar mission of protecting Protestant Christian values against the foe, right? And for the Ku Klux Klan, that was black people. They were the foe. They were the ones who were the enemy, right? Who was going to ruin everything that Americans, whoever that was in the Ku Klux mind, in my dad's mind, it was the founding fathers back in 1812, right?
Right.
That's who his enemy was fighting. I couldn't tell you, you know, it's probably similar for the Ku Klux Klan, but it might have been like Robert E. Lee or something. I don't know.
But essentially the same people.
Right, but they had this idea of Americanism and Protestant Christianity that they were fighting for against these black people who have never done anything to them except try to exist as humans, right? And they built up this whole cosmic war in their minds. The Ku Klux Klan has this whole cosmic war in their minds to justify hating people. And it's like, surprisingly, I guess what's sad to me is that I have such a easy time figuring that out.
Yeah.
I can see it. That's so sad to me, because I understand that world. I lived in it. I can see it. I can see that desire to fight against those who are going to destroy our values, because that was so much of what I was taught. Not specifically in the Ku Klux Klan way, but in, whatever the 1990s version of that is. That's how I was trained. But and it's a direct tie to that same way of thinking. So sad. God, that's sad.
It is sad.
Oh man.
I'm gonna pause this for just a second. I need to let the cat in. I need to go pee real quick. I will be back in just a moment, and then we'll continue. But you need to have this cat, and then I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the birth of a nation.
Oh boy. I can't believe they called it Birth of a Nation.
Oh, you will.
I will. This silly creature. This is Fox. You can't see her stuff.
I would love to blame on children the fact that I have a tiny bladder, but I just cannot. It's always been the case. Okay, so do you know when the film The Birth of a Nation was made?
1915, right?
It was not made in 1915, but that's very close. It was made in 1911, and it was based on a screenplay.
Oh, right. I did know that.
Yeah. So the play was a novel first, and then a play. It was called The Klansman, a historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan.
Which, just by the name, you're like,
by Thomas Dixon. Yes. So, the play came out in 1911 and was actually very popular, especially amongst older Confederate-style Americans. And then the film itself, you're right, came out 1914, 1915. That's when it was filmed and when it was released. And there was a lot of propaganda that came out prior to this film because it had a huge budget. Most films at the time were 12-reel serials, so they were shorter. They weren't like the same length that we think of films as these days because you had to do reel-to-reel films.
Well, and you had to sit through all of that silence.
You did have to sit through all that silence.
That sounds so hard to me.
It was one of the first films that was not a serial that was on these 15 reels. And it was also the first film that was ever shown at the White House.
So who was it?
Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, okay.
And here is one thing that was included, because Woodrow Wilson, right around the time that he was president, had actually written a history of the American people. And this is a quote that was included in the film, which is part of the reason why it was allowed to be shown at the White House. The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country.
The Southern country. Its very own country.
It's so interesting to me that the entire premise of the novel, the play, and the film was, oh, what shall we do, we poor beleaguered persons? we are the victims.
We're persecuted. It's victim stance.
Well,
yes.
it was one of the most
man.
expensive films that had ever been made at that point. The first film to be shown at the White House,
Right.
including a quote from the president at the time of its being shown at the White House.
Yeah.
This victim stance is entirely manufactured.
Right. Manufactured victim stance.
Yes.
That's.
But, so Johns Hopkins University was already a thing. And Woodrow Wilson and Dixon, the writer of the original novel, went to Johns Hopkins together and graduated together.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yes. Just to put a lot of our more popular higher education institutions into a little bit of the lens here of context.
Right. Well, that whole thing, like, it's such. I feel like people, or I'm gonna go with me. I so underestimate how much that I guess persecution complex, is that a thing?
Yes.
I feel
No,
like that's a thing.
it is a persecution complex.
Yeah, and how much of that is plays such a strong history in the United States. Like it's very much tied to Protestant Christian theology and thought processes.
Well, and you have to go to the Protestant and evangelicalism here as well.
Yeah.
Because the temperance and prohibition movements that were so popular took some of Paul's writings into account and took these key verses that they would base things off of, like, do not be drunk with wine wherein is excess. You have to cherry pick these verses that you're going to go with.
Oh yeah, there's only a few.
There's only a few. There's only a few. Do not be drunk with wine wherein is excess, but instead be filled with the Holy Spirit, which leads
Is
to
that
a lot
talking
of
about
that.
wine or the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But another one is, in this world you will have persecution, which is essentially a commandment of these readings of Scripture. So don't be drunk with wine, but also you will have persecution. If you're not being persecuted, you're not following God. So no matter what you're doing, you have to find something that is persecuting you. Otherwise, your identity is called into question.
Right, just like drinking wine would be.
Yes.
Right, like I could drink wine and that would mean I'm not following Christian values, or I could not be being persecuted. That was too many B's in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that would be not following Protestant Christian values if I'm not being persecuted, just like drinking wine would be.
Yeah. So I
feel like not many people know that.
You're right.
Even people who believe it don't necessarily understand it that way.
It's true. So a lot of Woodrow Wilson apologists will say that he had no idea that that's what the film was going to be, or that he was going to be quoted in those ways, and that Dixon was actually persecuting him, and that he was here for the good of all the nation, not just for the South. But if that's the case, why did Woodrow Wilson immediately after seeing the film for the first time at the White House hire a hall and make the Supreme Court watch it the next day?
Jeez. Because it was such a good movie.
Such a good movie. And initially, and we can take this, I've pulled up the Wikipedia page on The Birth of a Nation just so I have some extras.
That's what you're looking at.
Oh, I knew some of these things before, but I wanted to bring it up just so I have more. And some of this is new to me. This part I did not know. The next morning after they had shown it at the White House, Dixon, the author of the novel, called a North Carolina friend, Josephus Daniels, who was Secretary of the Navy. They set up a meeting, and with Dixon and Douglas White, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So since Dixon knew the Secretary of the Navy, he had an in to the Supreme Court because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court did not want to see it. He had heard it was super racist and had no interest. But when Dixon told him it was the true story of Reconstruction and the Klan's role in saving the South, White, recalling his youth in Louisiana, jumped to attention and said, "I was a member of the Klan, sir," and agreed to see the film. The rest of the Supreme Court followed.
What?
In addition to the entire Supreme Court in 1915, in the audience were many members of Congress and the diplomatic corps, the Secretary of the Navy, 38 members of the Senate, 50 members of the House of Representatives. The audience of 600 cheered and applauded throughout.
Well, and again, like, it's fascinating to me how, as you recall from what I described at the beginning, was just like this ragtag band of Confederate, what do I want to say? Racist, who kind of were sort of doing this weird secret society thing that turned into major acts of violence, right, is being presented on the same level that my father talked about Noah Webster, and Thomas Jefferson, and right,
And George Washington.
Right, they saved the country, right, and that's exactly what's happening. That's what you just read in 1915, 16, whatever it is, where people are like glorifying this first wave of the KKK,
Yeah.
who, for saving the South, which is not what happened remotely, right? They were just a bunch of vigilantes who killed a bunch of people, and now they're just glorifying it. That's crazy, man. That's crazy.
So, I need to touch on the xenophobia for just a second, since we're talking about the Founding Fathers, before we move on to this second wave that...
Well, that's where we are. This is the second wave.
This is the second wave. Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. Before we move on in the second wave then. Your father glorified the Founding Fathers of the United States as well as Noah Webster.
Yeah.
And most of our nationalist history classes did that. However, I was very privileged to see a little bit behind the scenes to where the documents made by the Founding Fathers, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, were picked apart a little bit for their theological accuracy. And they were not entirely theologically accurate, and we will not go into that right now. But I was told, as part of my government classes in high school, because I was involved in student government, that any inaccuracies theologically stemmed from the fact that Lafayette, the Frenchman, was involved in some of the writing of them. So obviously God was not entirely in charge because there were French people.
Yeah.
And French people, as we all know,
that's
famously don't believe in democracy.
Famously. No.
And therefore we cannot, anything that's bad there, we can blame on French people and Europeans being too liberal.
Yeah, evangelicals have no idea what the French Revolution is.
They do not. It's adorable. So that's the second wave, is Prohibition and the film and Woodrow Wilson. Where's the third wave?
David Duke. Well, that's more modern, more recent, but specifically it came about during the civil rights movement.
Okay.
And I'm going to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about that one.
About the civil rights movement?
No, about the third wave during the civil rights movement.
I don't know who David Duke is.
Oh, he's more recent. He was the Klan wizard, which is what they call their leader. The wizard. Who came up with that name? I know, it's
well,
so...
it's probably because of the pointy hat.
I guess. Except I'm pretty. I actually I do. I actually think I know that. That goes back to that fraternity thing where they had weird names for people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to be Masons.
Yeah, something like that. Masons
Okay.
or Illuminati or whatever one.
You know.
Yeah.
I have nothing to say.
I want to know more about. I feel like I don't know enough about those things. Like why? And mostly why. Well, it's that belonging thing, right? Like people want belonging.
People want belonging.
And that really is a thing. But it's so sad that like basic human need gets so twisted into this by means of fear, right? Again, third wave came around because of civil rights acts, right? Like just this reality of people fighting to have the right to vote, to
The
be
right to
human,
exist and be
to
part
exist.
of the community.
Like it's
the right to
such...
fulfill part of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Right.
and be an actual voice in their own community.
Yeah, right. Like just these. It is. I mean, that's the me being frustrated of why can't we just all get along? Like I'm not even. I don't even know if get along is the right word. Why can't we all just allow each other to exist? you know.
And ideally we would. In a more enlightened frame of mind, people are more willing and more secure to listen to what other people have to say and to debate it in a healthy way. But so many of us are still fighting on that pyramid.
Yeah.
Because so many of us still don't know for sure that we actually do belong. We don't feel like we're part of a community. And the easiest way to feel like you are a part of a community is by being a part of a tribe within that community. The easiest way to find belonging with one other person is by saying, hey, isn't that person weird? And you'll see this no matter where you are, no matter where you're working. It's always back to that middle school tribalism mentality where you and one other person make eye contact when someone else says something, and you can tell that they are thinking, that was fucking weird. Then you have a bond.
It's somebody else was weird.
Exactly.
That's so sad.
No, it's the easiest bond to form. And we are very insecure people. We are very unsure in our standing within our own communities, especially in the West, especially these days. There is so much moving around. There is so little security in what you have because you don't have a family home to fall back on. You don't have a community to fall back on. So few of us have extended families to fall back on. And us in particular are a very weird example of that because we for a long time did have extended family to fall back on, and now we do not. So it's a lot easier to be so scared that you look for tribalism wherever you can find it. And by looking for tribalism with one other person or two other people, the easiest way to get that is to say that person's weird. We're okay, but that person's weird. And then you have an immediate bond and you have an immediate tribe.
Yeah.
But then eventually what's going to happen is one of the people within your immediate bond and your immediate tribe is going to do something that is objectively weird. And then you and one other person are going to look at each other and be like, oh, that was weird. And then you're going to have that bond and the other person's on the outside. You're going from making Great Pyramids of Giza to making a tiny pyramid out of sand, which is so much less secure than it should be. Xenophobia is a problem.
You make it almost sound unavoidable.
It is unavoidable in our modern society, yes.
Ouch. I mean, for the individual, you make it sound unavoidable.
Yes.
So what do you do?
You have to not look at somebody else and say that was weird. And you can't do that.
Oh, no.
Because you have to do that or you can't make a bond with somebody around you. You have to very functionally and intentionally dig roots deep down with people that you disagree with and think are weird. And not ostracize them or hate them because of that. Which is impossible. I heard my neighbor say one thing that I disagreed with to their child, not even to me. I overheard this and I disagreed with it, and now I think less of that neighbor. And we have had maybe 3 conversations, but haven't had any since then because now I think that neighbor's weird.
Okay, but all right, we're gonna think people are weird, but I feel like it's a long way. Yeah, I'll go with that. A long ways from that person's weird to I should lynch that person or burn down their house.
It's not, though. It's not, because you can see it in any workplace you've ever been in. You and one other person hear somebody say something, you think, that's weird. Then you have somebody else, and that same weird person says one weird thing, and you're like, that's weird. And you make a conversation with that person and that person, but not the person who said the weird thing. And then before you know it, everyone is saying, that person's weird, and they quit.
But at the same time, I've experienced thinking that about somebody, and then also coming to a point of realization that that's okay.
Yeah.
That person's weirdness is, that's who they are, and they're an okay person, and they're doing their best, and I'm not probably going to do the same things that person does because it's not my thing, but I'm glad that they do that for them. Like, I've done that. I can think of a very specific example in my head.
I can too. I can name examples from both sides. Because you can do either thing. You can embrace the weirdos and the outcasts and be like, this is what makes you beautiful. This is what makes you wonderful. Or you can say, oh, we are the weirdos and outcasts, and we are beautiful and wonderful, and anything outside that is probably a threat. Either way, you're definitely the weirdo. Because we're the weirdos. And if you're listening to this podcast, you are also the weirdo.
That just sounds like fundamentalism to me, though.
No. You have to listen to both of these separately.
Okay.
A, I am weird. You are weird. We will stick together. Ah, look. That other person is also very weird. They're going to say weird things. They're going to do weird shit. And that is also wonderful. I don't understand it, but it's wonderful. Option B. I am weird. You are weird. And that's the end. Anything outside of that is a threat or something stranger that has happened. And you create the culture that you are going to be a part of. Are you part of culture A or are you part of culture B? Are you looking at somebody while somebody says something weird and saying, at least we're not that weird? Or are you looking at somebody while somebody says something weird and saying, wow, that person sounds almost as weird as we are. Let's bring them into this. It's impossible to not build social silos.
Yeah.
You have to decide, though. You can't be
friends with everybody on Earth.
You cannot. But you can decide who's welcome in your silo.
Yeah.
And you can expand it to meet needs and requirements. But what's going to happen is eventually you're going to say, that person's a little too weird for me. I'm going to stay on my end of the silo, and they can be in my silo still. It's impossible to not alienate people. But it is possible to love them even if you don't understand or agree.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, and that's a hard thing to understand and live out and do well. I would say it's hard to do it well. Which is why it's such a radical thing that Jesus said. right? That we still thought, like, I still will say out loud, because I think it was a truly radical thing to say, love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Oh,
Whoever said it, however it got to be,
well,
it was
yes.
a fairly radical thing.
But
It's a fairly radical idea.
We gotta step back to redlining. We don't have the same neighbors we used to have. We have socially engineered our neighbors to look as much as possible like us.
Well, I'm not.
So we have to step out
white
of context and out of context and out of context and out of context.
Yeah.
To not think of neighbor as that person who's in the same subdivision and HOA as you,
Right. No.
but as the person who you have to stand next to at whichever event you're at next.
Yeah.
That weirdo asshole wearing the strange clothes who smells just a little bit funky. Are you going to love that person?
Right. I at this point, I think of neighbor as just any other human being I meet in the world or universe. That's neighbor. In my mind, it translates love the humans as yourself.
That's a better translation. We should probably do our own translation. Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh God.
Yeah, we could spend the next 22 years.
So
Isn't
long.
that the average?
Such a long freaking book, man.
I think that's the average for translation last I checked, but that was in like 20.
Yeah, but if we were just doing it from
10?
English to us speak, I feel like it would not take 12
Oh,
years.
absolutely not.
Yeah, it wouldn't take 20 years. If we had to learn some language we don't know and then translate it from English into that language, that would probably take 20 years.
So, Tess, how do you not be the KKK? I ask easy questions.
You know, the truth is, like, it's stupid how close my life is to being the KKK. So, like, you know, it's or how much of my life was that, if I'm honest. Like, I don't even how much of my life was influenced by white supremacist ideas and fear of immigrants and I mean, not to mention just being propped up by the institution of slavery and the wealth that was built in the past. And I mean, like, there's so many things that are hard for me to even gather into my brain at the same time. Honestly, like, it's a lot of things that I had no understanding of for most of my life, but had a major impact on my life. And then things that were, excuse me, that were just like very, just part of growing up as a white person in an evangelical church in the 90s and early aughts, right? Like, there was just, you know, I remember like going to Dunkin' Donuts with my grandpa and him talking about how the Mexicans were taking everybody's jobs, right? And I was like 5 or 6, you know, like I didn't even know what a Mexican was, right? Like, I had no context for this, except, you know, like there was some brown person over there that he was kind of subtly referring to, right? Like, that was my whole context for that conversation as a 5 or 6-year-old, right? Like, I don't know what stealing jobs means, or I don't know where Mexico is. I'm 6, Grandpa. What are you talking about? Right? But like, but I know that was a thing that was said to me, right? And there's lots of things like this in my life, but you know, just and I don't think I personally it was so much of my life I feel like I just kind of shoved into this I'll figure it out someday bubble. I don't understand that. I'll figure it out someday. It was when I was young. But and I did for most of those things. Like, oh, I did figure that out someday. And and essentially when I started to figure it out, it was just, oh, Grandpa's a racist, and that's like, and it's so sad because like the other side of things is I was always told racism was wrong, right? Like there was nobody telling me racism wasn't wrong. I'll put it that way. And there were people telling me it was wrong, right? That was never like, there wasn't ever any question in my mind about that. Even growing up in the way I did, like everybody said that was wrong, right? But then they did it, right? They did racism, even saying racism was wrong. They still had this fear of jobs being stolen. They still had this, I don't, like, that was the big one I remember. People actually saying out loud. That, and the other thing I remember is just like the kind of fear that somehow it's very vague memory that just, I mean, not memory is the wrong word, impression I had as a kid of that immigrants were somehow tied to voting, and that was somehow tied to the ability to make the world a less Christian place. Like, that was kind of impressions I had as a kid. And which again was just that, it's just, what we've been talking about, that fear of xenophobia. And that they're gonna make things wrong, and it's gonna be not holy, and make it harder to save people and harder to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, you're totally pulling yourself up by your bootstraps if you have to worry about other people doing it too.
Right. Yeah, which, that's the whole thing, but we should maybe have a whole episode about that, but called bootstraps.
I'm pretty sure that's copyright infringement.
Oh no. Probably is. But anyway, what was the question? I know it's about me not being the KKK. Yeah, I knew vaguely what it was, but yes, and again, so like all that to say, my life tended kind of that way, and for me, it really came down to that statement of love your neighbor as yourself, because I was very Christian. I was pastoring, and so the Bible was very important to me at that time. Uh-huh. And like that sentence made me, and it's a whole story, but to try and keep it simple, that sentence made me really stop and think, like, is the trajectory of my life and beliefs headed towards doing that, or more KKK? Like, it was literally pretty much that thought. I don't know if I didn't think KKK at the time, but it was pretty close, because there was a lot of things happening that felt to me very KKK, right?
Well, yeah, there was that one church member who said, do you know any Mexicans looking for a job? Because I know those people are hard workers. You don't have to pay them much. So
yeah.
That wasn't KKK. It was fine.
Oh, yeah. Well, or the other church member who was like, I'm really worried that the Muslims are going to come in and just take over the whole town. And we were in freaking northern Idaho, and not one single person was remotely Muslim, but this guy was really worried about it.
Oh, and the other one who would come
really
up to
worried.
Me after church and shake my hand and then pet each of the children and then come back to me and say, it's just so nice to see such purebred children.
Right. That
in
was
church.
Just disturbing all the way around, because that was our goal.
Not even
Please don't insinuate
not
that
even
was our goal.
only person to compliment me on purebred children
No,
because they were blonde and blue-eyed.
yeah, no. Which is crazy, and that was like just 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Or less. 8, 7, 10 years ago.
What?
We had so many
God,
interactions like that. Yeah. And, you know, like that's not very long.
It's not.
It's so sad. And, you know, to say, and that's, you know, that's going from 1915 to 2015, right? Like, 100 years, and it's still such a huge undergirding part, and it's probably gotten worse in the last 10 years, honestly, in the United States.
From what I've seen, it has gotten worse.
Yeah,
or at least more forthright. It's gotten less subtle.
Yeah, well, and you know, I was a lot of the info I got about the KKK came from Stuff You Should Know podcast, and they were, which, please go listen to Stuff You Should Know podcast. It's amazing. I love it. They don't have a clue who I am. I just listened to it. But they for especially the first two waves, they talked about how eventually like the government ended up intervening somehow, right? Or the president ended up standing up against racism essentially at the time. Not Wilson, obviously, but right. Eventually, the government got to a point where a president was willing to stand against racism, which it probably took till FDR with the second wave, but and it was in I brought up the podcast because they mentioned how it had an effect that somebody in power and popularity, like the president of the United States, was able to have this effect of helping to, in these very specific cases, like help make the KKK go away, right? Like, and again, like they were very careful of like that doesn't mean racism went away or like white supremacists didn't exist anymore, right? Obviously, it continued to be, but the fact that somebody stood up, had power and influence, and was willing to speak against racism, if you're just looking at this case of the KKK, it made it become less. I guess
well,
is what
it made
I'll say.
it slightly less socially acceptable.
Right, it made it less socially
because
acceptable.
Somebody that you actually looked up to and was in power.
Right.
And it has to have both those things. They have to look up to them and they do have to be in power.
Yeah.
For it to make a difference.
Right. And they asked the question, like, I wonder if, there were people who actually stopped being racist because of this. And, I don't know, kind of the conclusion was maybe some people did. We can't know for sure. And probably for the most part, it was more of a, just kind of a not being so much in the spotlight sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure there was a couple people who had their minds changed, right? But my point being that I feel like you can see the opposite of that in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And where we have seen white supremacist ideology be a very strong part of the political party in power.
Well, and that's not unexpected. I've contributed to this in my own ways, and I am always going to have to be held to account for that. But in 2005 to 2006, I went to Hobby Lobby and was able to find a handkerchief of the American flag and a handkerchief of the Confederate flag. And when I made a pillow of them, I sewed together two I was a very crafty child. I sewed together these two handkerchiefs. I made a throw pillow out of it. It had the Confederate flag and the American flag. One was on each side. But when I picked that apart, because I'm a very thrifty child, I don't believe in throwing things away and cutting them up and that sort of thing. So I used a seam ripper to take apart the handkerchiefs that had the American flag and the Confederate flag on them. when I did that, I felt guilty enough about taking apart something that had flags on it to call my brother and say, I do not feel right having the Confederate flag in my home right now, but I didn't feel right disposing of it. So I had to give this handkerchief from Hobby Lobby with the Confederate flag to one of my brothers in 2011, 2012, so that the flag would not be disrespected. This is the sway that these flags and ideals still hold on people to this day. And I understand that was 15 years ago.
I don't, but it was.
It was.
I don't understand it.
I don't either. We're old. But we like to think of these things as being in the past. And a lot of the rhetoric around them, especially the theological or religious rhetoric, says these things are in the past and we've moved past them and it's wonderful. But that's not taking into account the reverence that a person raised overseas still had for the Confederate flag in 2010, 2011, 2012, to not be willing to throw it in the trash, even if it was a handkerchief from Hobby Lobby that cost 75 cents. It's insane the amount of hold and sway that KKK teachings have on Protestantism and modern evangelicalism.
Yeah, no, it's that. Well, I guess that was my thought, is just how much these ideals and ideas still have just a huge sway in how people think about things. Like, it's sadly such a strong part of what America is, what the United States is, and this history of racism and defending Protestant Christian ideals. Like, it's if anything, it's they've doubled down, right? Like, if anything, it's become a bigger problem. I don't know if bigger is the right word, but it's become more blatant lately. I guess because it just never went away, right? It's just, and like, I think people pretend like it went away, and like we can even talk about the KKK in waves. But why did it come back 3 times? Because it never went away, right? Why do we need to talk about it today? Because this desire to other very specific groups of people in the defense of Protestant Christianity is still a big problem. It's still a big thing. It's still a big way people think about the world, and influences how they vote and and who they hang out with, and whether or not they choose to love people or hate people. That feels like a good stopping point.
It does. I've been listening to Buddhist podcasts recently.
No,
No, that's fine. I'm not converting yet.
It is fine.
But
I'm just maybe worried about what you're going to say next.
Oh no, that's okay. It's just that a lot of I listen to Buddhist and cult and true crime podcasts a lot, along with a lot of other things. I'm a multifaceted human being, as are all of us. But one of the things that I have been admiring the most about the Buddhist style podcasts is that they do not have the problem of space in the way that a lot of the true crime podcasts do. So the true crime podcasts are more and you can't leave any space unfilled. You can't have downtime. We can't have breath. You have to pause things. If you take an in-breath, you have to make sure that you pause the recording and then restart it after your in-breath so that there are no spaces and that you keep vamping up this sense.
You have to use the word like a lot.
You do have to use it. And you have to use strategically.
I've overheard some of these true crime podcasts.
I know. What I've been admiring about the Buddhist podcast specifically this week is that they strategically use silence. So you don't feel that you have to fill every single second of every single thing. It is okay to breathe.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Silence is okay.
Yeah, I've been realizing that in my life of just how much I tend to pressure myself to always be doing something. And trying to, and like, it's not that it's bad to be doing something, but like, it causes a lot of stress to be like, I need to be doing something, right? Like, that's just stress. And trying to tell myself it's okay to just realize I need to recover, I need to rest.
I need to not do the thing.
Yeah, like just working out more isn't actually gonna solve all of my problems. If you know, just doing
now
it
you're
again.
just getting personal about it.
Sorry, I'm talking about me.
Yeah.
Because I keep telling myself, you know, if I just do it more and more and more, it's gonna be better and better and better. But then I get to a point where I burn out.
You get fundamentalist about that sort of shit.
Yeah.
If you're just doing more and more and more and more just so you can do it because you think you're going to feel better if you do more of it, it's like...
Right?
I mean, not to bring it back full circle or anything, but it's like the KKK just doubling down and doubling down and doubling down.
Yeah.
Because the farther you can go, the better it must be.
Yeah. But the doubling down isn't actually asking myself, is this making my life better? Is it helping me? Is it helping my muscles? Is it helping me burn fat? Is it actually doing any of these things? Or am I just doing it because I think I should?
Yeah.
And that's not really good reason to do it because you think you should.
It is not. And with that being said, thank you for joining us. Again, on Shunt for Good Reason. I'm Anna.
And I'm Tess.
And we're going to turn it off now. You can turn off that one, and I'll turn off this one. I have the cat, so I can't move.